Hi, everyone. I'm here with Matt Clifford, the co-founder and CEO of Entrepreneur First, an international talent investor which supports individuals to build amazing technology companies. It now has offices in Toronto, London, Berlin, Paris, Singapore, Hong Kong, and Bangalore. Matt also sits on the board of Code First Girls, which he co-founded in 2013 to teach young women how to code. He actually started his career at McKinsey and holds degrees from Cambridge and MIT. With that, I'll hand over to Matt. We'll take Q&As at the end, or feel free to drop them in the chat during the presentation.
Thanks so much, Zara. It's really great to be here. Excited to speak to you all and hope to be able to chat later as we take your questions. So what I thought I would do today is speak for about 20 minutes on the three biggest lessons since I started Entrepreneur First about a decade ago, and the three lessons I've learned in helping founders raise $1 billion, which is sort of roughly what people have raised at EF over the last 7 years now. I thought it would be useful to try and distill the most important things that I think you will need to know if you're just at the start of building a business or even just contemplating building a business. Now, actually, one of the things, and I'm not just saying this because he was very nice to me at the end of his talk, but one of the things we recommend all entrepreneurs do is read Rob Fitzpatrick's book. But that's not what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to start a little bit higher level than that and leave the detail to Rob. So a little bit about what I want to do. I'm only going to speak for 20 minutes. I want to leave plenty of time for questions. So talk a little bit about the Entrepreneur First journey, what we've done over the last decade, then sort of try and distill, as I said, three big things that I think you need to know if you're planning to start a business. The three things I've seen be the most important factors in the success of our founders who've built billions of dollars worth of companies. And then we'll take questions from you until we run out of time. So what is Entrepreneur First? Well, Entrepreneur First is a different kind of venture institution. So you're probably familiar with things like accelerators, the famous ones like Y Combinator or Techstars. Entrepreneur First looks a little bit like that, but it's actually very, very different. And the main way in which it's different is that at EF, we believe that the world is missing out on some of its best founders. There's a picture of Alice, my co-founder, and I. As Zara said, we left McKinsey in 2011 to start Entrepreneur First, and I spent 2 years there. And the big motivation, the mission at EF, the thing that we have kept as the common thread over the last decade, is this idea that there are many people in the world who would be great founders, who have the potential, have the talent and the ambition to build globally important companies, but don't. Why don't they? Primarily because they grow up, live, work, go to school, college, university in places where starting a company is either just really weird, it's culturally abnormal, it's looked down on, or they grow up in places where there isn't the density of network for them to get started, for them to find the right co-founders, advisors, investors, employees, etc. And so what we wanted to build at Entrepreneur First was a new kind of institution that would solve that problem. And specifically, the way we do that is that we invest in individuals before they have a company. So one of our big beliefs is that many people who would be great founders are held back because they don't have someone in their immediate network who is the right co-founder for them, or they have an idea, but it's not yet ready. It needs time to be turned into a venture scale idea, an idea that you can raise investment for. And so our belief is that you can either miss out on those people and say, well, they're not ready, they're not there, they shouldn't be founders, or you can invest in them before they have a company and take them through a company building process from scratch. And that's what we do at Entrepreneur First. So in each of the 6 cities around the world where we operate, every 6 months, we build a community of 50 to 100 individuals who we think have what it takes to be world-class founders. And then we pay them, which is quite an unusual feature of the model. We pay people to quit their jobs and join us and spend 3 months in that community, finding a co-founder, iterating through an idea. And then if there's something promising at the end of it, we invest and help them take it to the next level. So when we start doing this in 2011, people thought it was pretty weird. It was really tough for us to raise finance. No one thought this was a good idea. And actually, at some points, we thought maybe it isn't a good idea. Maybe we've missed something here. But over the last 10 years, we've been very fortunate to build a great track record in backing amazing people to build amazing companies. So just a snapshot of where we are today. So as of today, we funded over 3,000 individuals around the world. Between them, they've built over 350 companies that have gone on to raise further capital. Between them, they're worth $6 billion, and they've raised about $1 billion of external venture capital as well. And so we've been so fortunate to spend so much time with so many people at the very start of their journeys. Probably we have seen more founders before they're founders than anyone else in the world. We have been involved in the creation of more companies than anyone else in the world. And that has really, it's been a huge privilege and something we've learned a ton from. And that's what I want to try and lay out in the rest of this session. But before we do, I just want to give a few highlights of what we've seen at EF. Like, where does this 6 billion valuation come from? Well, one great example from this year is a company called Tractable. Tractable is a company that we helped to build back in 2014. Here you can see on the screen Razvan, Alex, and Adrian, the three co-founders. Alex and Razvan met at Entrepreneur First. They joined us with very little experience. Razvan came straight out of university. Alex came with just a year of work experience. They met at EF. They built their team at EF. They came up with their idea at EF. And today, Tractable is a billion-dollar company that serves the global insurance industry. They build an AI tool that allows insurance companies to evaluate claims for car insurance better than a human, just using computer vision. They became a unicorn company this year with a $60 million round that propelled them into that club. They're the UK's first computer vision unicorn. It's a company that we helped to build it. Another great example would be Accurix. They just raised their Series B at a $500 million valuation. Super proud of having to help build this company. You can see the founders here. They're sort of hiding. You got Jacob on the left-hand side of the picture and Lawrence somewhere else. They met at Entrepreneur First back in 2016. They had a real passion for healthcare. They iterated through several ideas and eventually came up with Accurix, which is a piece of software used by doctors for healthcare communication. They've had absolutely extraordinary growth. Today, they're used by 98% of doctors in the UK. So almost every doctor in the UK in primary care uses Accurix to communicate with patients. And as a result, they've played a key role in battling the COVID-19 pandemic. They actually, as it says here, almost half of UK vaccines were booked through Accurix. So super proud to have helped build that company. Also, big fans of this company. Dispatch is a really new company. They only graduated from EF back in September of 2020, but by June of this year, they'd already raised $10 million round led by Andreessen Horowitz, one of the world's most famous investors. What Dispatch do is they serve restaurant quality meals anywhere in the UK. So it's not like Deliveroo where someone rides on a bike with it from the local store. They have found a way to package meals such that they can be served by courier anywhere in the UK. And they just saw absolutely extraordinary growth during the pandemic. And final example, just from literally this week, one of our companies from an early cohort, Permittive, that does privacy compliant advertising. So how they serve you relevant ads without tracking you personally. That's what Permittive does. They just announced a $75 million round led by SoftBank Vision Fund, which was super exciting. So we've been fortunate to work with all these amazing founders. And part of the reason it works is that we invest in these founders, but we ourselves, our money comes from some of the world's best founders. So we've been really fortunate to have investors in EF like Reid Hoffman, founder of LinkedIn, one of the most successful entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley. He's our biggest investor in EF, the company. Tavit Hinrikus, the founder of Wise, now a public company, one of Europe's most successful entrepreneurs, another investor in EF. Demis Hassabis, the founder of DeepMind, maybe the most important AI company in the world, now part of Google, of course, another investor in EF. And then one that we're particularly proud of, these guys are Rob Bishop and Zihan Wang. They were the founders of a company called Magic Pony Technology that they sold to Twitter in 2016 for $150 million. And the reason we're especially proud of this one is this was an EF company. And when they sold that company, they put some of the money that they got from it back into EF, which we think is a really great testimony to the power of the community we're building. So having seen all these great founders up close and had a chance to work with them, what have I learned? Well, three things, just three lessons that I want you to have top of mind as you think about starting to build a company or think about that you might build a company one day. So I'll be quite quick, but I want to really drill these home. So the first is that co-founders really matter. Choosing the right co-founder has a profound impact on your success as a company. One of the most important things we do at EF is help people find their co-founders. When you find the right co-founder, the amplifying effect that has on your business, the way it increases not only your chances of success, but the size of what you can build is absolutely extraordinary. We say here, and we sort of joke that it's also the most expensive decision you'll ever make. Most people split their equity 50-50 with a co-founder. So you really need to believe that your co-founder is someone who's going to make your company more valuable, because your company will become the most valuable thing that you own if you're successful. And so picking someone who is all in with you, who you really respect and admire, you share values with, you share a vision with, but also you think is just a machine, is going to make you succeed. Super, super important. We see far too many entrepreneurs fail because they just picked someone randomly as a co-founder. I don't mean truly randomly, out of a phone book or something, but they just picked a friend because they knew they wanted to start a company. We really think that's a bad idea. One thing we've learned at Entrepreneur First is finding a co-founder who is as talented, as ambitious as you, and is ready to start a company with you right now is so, so important. Don't pick someone because they're the only one you know. Run a proper search to find a co-founder. Make sure that you have the right partner to build. I'm so lucky to be building Entrepreneur First with Alice. I feel it's one of the best decisions I ever made in business. And she's absolutely made, yeah, far more than twice as valuable as it would be otherwise. And so I cannot emphasize enough the importance of picking the right partner on day one. Second big lesson that I have is that ambition matters. So I think sometimes in Europe, I was talking about this with Zara just before we came on stage, like there's still some catching up to do with Silicon Valley. One of the dimensions on which there's still some catching up to do is we still need to be more ambitious. It's starting to change. We obviously have some big European companies that are now having a huge impact in the world. I already mentioned Wise. Hopin, that we're all doing this event on, is a great example. Companies like Spotify. But when you look at the very biggest tech companies in the world, they're still American or Chinese. It's companies like Apple, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, Tencent, etc. And, partly that's important because, we want our wins to be as big as possible. But one of the things that I've learned from working with thousands of founders is that it's not only that ambition is important in determining the size of your outcome, but actually being more ambitious makes you more likely to succeed. Why is that? Well, basically because ambition is in itself a valuable resource. Let me try and explain that, because I think that's sometimes counterintuitive. I think a lot of people believe that, well, if I actually try and do something less ambitious, then that will make it easier. If I try and do something that is not as big, then surely it will not be as hard. Actually, what I've learned at EF watching founders do this is that the opposite is true. Actually, it's just as hard to build a small business as a big business. Why is that? Well, basically because when you start a startup, you have no tangible assets. You have no tangible resources. You have very little money in the bank. You have no property. You probably don't even have a team at that stage. You might not have a product. And so everything that you need to do is going to be in the future. You're going to need to attract talent to come and work with you. You're going to need to attract capital for investors to pay that talent to be able to do all the things you want to do. But talent and capital, two resources that are attracted to ambition. So if you want to do something really, really big, you're far more likely to attract great people to work with you and great investors to work with you. One way of thinking about that is to think about it yourself. Like, would you, if you were choosing not to start a business, but to join a startup, would you join the ambitious one or the less ambitious one? Of course, you would join the most ambitious one. And so having a big vision from day one, truly aiming to change the world, to reach hundreds of millions or even billions of people with what you're doing, that is one of the best ways for you to attract talent and capital early on. You have very little else in the bank, very little else to show. And so baking in your ambition from day one of the most important things you can do as a founder. Third point, work on your edge. What do I mean by edge? I mean your personal competitive advantage. This, I feel, is super important and often neglected. So a lot of people say to me, I don't know what idea I should work on. I'm just going to come up with an idea. Generally, this is not the right way to start a startup. One thing we found very strongly at EF is the importance of founder idea fit. What is founder idea fit? Founder idea fit is the idea that there isn't such a thing as a generically good entrepreneur or a generically good idea. What's magic is when the right founder for the right idea comes together. So, you can imagine this even with the biggest and most successful examples. Larry Page, phenomenal founder of Google, one of the most important companies in the world, but he probably wouldn't have been the right founder for Facebook, and vice versa. Mark Zuckerberg built one of the biggest businesses in the world, but he probably wouldn't have built Amazon. So you have to build the company that's right for you. And the easiest way to make sure you're at least pointing in the right direction is to think really hard about your strengths. We call this entrepreneur first. We call this your edge. You need to think about, what is it about you that stands out? What is there in your background, in your skills, in your experience that will make you better than the next person trying to start the same idea? Far too many people believe that their ideas are unique. In general, what we see at EF, where we're lucky to see thousands and thousands, in fact, tens of thousands of applications each year, is that the same ideas all become popular at the same time. Often, when people write ideas in the application form, they believe that it's something that they're onto that no one else is. But often we see that when an idea's time has come, lots and lots of people will be working on it. So one of the most important questions you can ask yourself as a founder is, why you? Why will you succeed in building this business? Let's imagine that 12 teams around the world are all going to start working somewhere in the same space. Why will you win? The answer has to come back to, what is your personal competitive advantage? Now, that can be a range of things. If you have a deep technical background, for example, it may be that you can build something that other people can't build. If you have experience in a particular industry or other domain, it may be that you understand a space that other people don't understand. If you have a hobby or an obsession, something you do in your spare time that's made you really, really skillful in some area, that might be your edge. But you should think really hard about, what is it that makes you stand out? And don't just start a random idea. In general, there are exceptions, of course. There are exceptions to any rules in startups. But in general, you really want to be working on the something where you have a personal competitive advantage. Now, the really interesting thing is how this interacts with co-founders. So you will have a personal competitive advantage, but so will your co-founder. And the very best companies typically come when two people's edges interact. In other words, where you're working on something where you're making the most of your personal competitive advantage, and your co-founder also is. Maybe I can use as an example Tractable, the company I was telling you about before, this billion-dollar company now working in serving the global insurance industry with its AI claims evaluation tool. Where did that idea come from? Well, basically, it came from a combination of the founder's edges. Razvan, who's the CTO of that company, had a very deep technical background. He'd been doing a master's degree in machine learning at Cambridge University with one of the top machine learning professors in the world. He was able to build cutting edge AI products, particularly in computer vision, which is what they were working on. Alex, on the other hand, he did have a background in computer science, but nowhere near as deep as Razvan. He wouldn't have been able to build the core product. But he knew enough about AI to understand where it might be valuable. And what he did have was commercial work experience in a fast moving sector. And so as a result, he was able to figure out where AI could create a ton of value for customers. And so when they came together at EF, they started working on ideas that were the intersection of their two edges, commercial experience and technical experience. Now, they didn't find the right thing first time. They didn't initially land on insurance. Originally, they were looking actually at applications of the same technology in the oil and gas industry. But by sticking to what they were good at, by iterating through ideas based on their edge, they ultimately found Tractable, which today, as I say, is a billion-dollar company. So I think if you think about those three ideas together, find the right co-founder, work on your edge, and bake ambition in from day one, you can start to think about, even if you're not ready to start a company today, how you can start to prepare for starting a company. My big advice would be, build your network so that you have great co-founders in your network. Or apply to Entrepreneur First, where we'll help you find a co-founder with you, of course. That's probably, I believe, the best way to find a co-founder. Two, work on your edge. Figure out what you can or want to be really good at and go really deep on trying to develop expertise. Most founders have this edge in something, even if it's not obvious on day one how it's relevant to what they're building. And third, don't be afraid of ambition. Get comfortable thinking big and articulating a big vision. Don't be embarrassed. Don't be too European about it, I guess. Be willing to copy our friends in America and think big and talk big from day one. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying that your idea, your vision should just be hand wavy, hand waving rubbish. It has to be grounded in reality. But be willing to imagine the biggest version of the idea you could work on. These are all things that we help people with at Entrepreneur First. If you want to learn more about EF, you can go to joinef.com and find out more there. We take applications, as I said, twice a year for cohorts all around the world. You can also follow me on Twitter if you want to learn more. I'm at Matthew Clifford. Always happy to engage in people who are thinking about starting businesses there. And I'd be really happy to take your questions now. Thanks so much for letting me speak to you.
Thank you so much, Matt. That was amazing. We have quite a few questions in the chat. To
Yeah.
start you off, you mentioned a competitive edge. And I wanted to ask, when you were leaving McKinsey to start EF, what was your competitive edge and maybe Alice's?
Thanks. The reason I'm laughing is I always get this question, and I always have to admit that we did not follow our own advice. So part of what I would say is don't be like me. Like EF has taken us 10 years to build, partly because we were not very qualified to build it. So we didn't really have an edge in what we ended up doing. Like with no experience in VC, with no experience in startups, with no experience in investment. And all those things were things we had to learn painfully. And it really took us 3 years before we figured out what we were doing properly. It was only in 2014 that we really started investing in the model that we have today. So part of the reason I give this advice to founders is don't have a 3 years like our first 3 years where you feel like you're wandering around in the desert trying to learn everything from scratch. That said, I think we did have some edge. One edge that we had, even though it wasn't in venture capital, was we'd both become really obsessed with this idea of institutions for talent. So, I think we both applied to McKinsey partly because we thought it was the place where ambitious people would go to get their start as a career. And, in many ways, McKinsey was a fantastic experience. We made great friends there. The work was great. I said I really admire McKinsey as an institution, but it wasn't the right place to learn how to be an entrepreneur. And so I suppose one of our edges, although probably too small an edge, was that we felt we really understood the career frustrations of ambitious people because we were those people. So in a way, like a great piece of startup advice is build for customers that you understand. In many ways, we were our own customer. So although we did lack edge, it's one of the reasons it took us so long. It did mean that I think we had enough of an edge in understanding ambition that it gave us a bit of a head start.
Definitely, you've seen so many people from McKinsey go on to start really amazing companies. And I think they said the same thing. So questions from the chat. We have how to deal with rejection or know when to change. If you're super ambitious and excited about your project, but are not seeing immediate results, how do you balance knowing to wait it out? In your case, maybe the 10 years, or pivot and take a different approach.
Yeah, so we believe in something at EF that we would call linear ideation. And let me explain what that is because it's a useful tool for answering this question. So, when you're building something that people really, really want. Like when you talk to customers and you're building something that they can't get enough of, it's such a different feeling from anything else as a founder. Like they are begging you to deliver the thing you've promised, even if it's not ready. They're willing to use the crappy version that doesn't have all the features they need and doesn't work yet just because it's so good. So like that feeling is unmistakable. And so really this question is about when you're not feeling that, when you're getting a lot of no's or worse than no's, just sort of like indifference. People are like, oh yeah, it's kind of cool. But then they're not all in on it. So how do you deal with that? Well, linear ideation, which is what we believe in the EF, is you say, what is the smallest nugget of what we're working on that feels like it's working? And how do we use that as the seed of the next thing that we work on? I think a mistake that founders make often is the less that they give up too quickly. It's the when they give up, they start completely from scratch with a blank sheet of paper. Well, that's not useful because as sort of Rob probably emphasized, entrepreneurship is a learning experience. You're trying to gradually compound the learning over time until you get to the point that you have problem solution fit and eventually product market fit. And so I think learning when to give up, it's I think of it less as give up on the whole idea. If you're working on your edge, then actually you should be broadly in the zone. Like you shouldn't be doing a 180 because of customer feedback.
Mm.
So what you want to find out is like which is the bit, like maybe your hypothesis overall was wrong, but which is the bit that still feels true? And how can you use that as the seed of the next stage of the journey? I mean, ultimately, giving up is sort of a relative term. I mean, later on, when you've got lots of employees and you've got to pay them, if you run out of money, you run out of money, you're done, right? But when it's just one or two of you at the start, it's really about how much time do you dedicate to it? Are you full time or can you keep it going part time until you find the right thing? at EF, we really encourage people to go all in and full time, and that's because we pay people so they can afford to do that. But there's no harm, in working slowly on something. If you haven't quite found the right thing yet, I wouldn't give up if you still feel that there's something there that's true. You just got to, make sure that you're not just lurching wildly from idea to idea.
And where did EF fall on that scale? From one side, you mentioned that when you hit the right product, you'll know because everyone will be telling you they love it. Or, you might face some difficulties finding people because you mentioned, and I think Entrepreneur First is very like visionary in that you were talent investors before that was even a term,
Yeah.
like investing in people before they even had an idea. So you must have had a lot of people that doubted it. So where exactly did you fall on that scale?
One of the most valuable resources you have as a founder, sort of joining up the last two questions, is willpower. And really, a startup only dies when a founder truly loses the will to carry it on. Like there's always a way to carry on. Again, maybe even if not full time, as long as you still believe in it. And so the question is like, how do you kind of build and maintain willpower? We had a lot of knocks at the beginning, exactly as you're saying, Zara. Like we had so many pitches early on where people were just like, "Yeah, it's cool. Come back in a year or whatever." And like clearly they just meant we don't believe in it. And that, it was pretty painful. But what we did do and what I think founders need to do is take the wins. So when things do work, when you get even a small milestone along the way, like really celebrate that and use that to kind of replenish your willpower. I would say that even now we need, like I need sort of good things to happen to stay like super confident. We're very lucky we've got a big portfolio now, so good things happen all the time. But it was a really special moment for us this year when we got our first unicorn business. It was really exciting to feel at Entrepreneur First, we'd helped these people build a company from scratch that was now worth $1 billion. So I'd say like on the we had to pivot quite a lot to find the right business model, but we didn't have to pivot the core idea. So we did do linear ideation. We never stopped thinking that talent was the answer. We had to
Yeah.
change it a lot. And to be clear, when I say like people, when we got a lot of knocks at the beginning, I don't mean that those people were wrong. Actually, I think they were right. I think the first version of EF didn't make sense, and we gradually pivoted it in something that hopefully makes sense today. And I think one of the reasons to work on something that you truly profoundly believe in, where you think the mission is important, is it gives you the chance to keep your willpower high even when you're getting a lot of pushback.
Absolutely. And I think when you're working with such ambitious people that are already doing amazing things and they haven't moved to entrepreneurship yet, being able to pay people in Entrepreneur First is a good way to target the sort of risk averse nature. I think when you're working somewhere like McKinsey, you have exciting projects, you have a very, comfortable lifestyle perhaps, and moving into entrepreneurship can be scary. So I think, you've been able to de-risk that a little bit, which is super exciting. We had a question here about co-founders, and I think, that's a great topic to ask you on. And someone wanted to know when it's too late to realize that you've been mistaken about finding the right co-founder. And also, I know at EF, you guys have a really interesting way of talking about co-founder and the successes and failures. I don't even know if failures is the right word, actually. So what are your thoughts on that?
Um, yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think the short answer is the wrong co-founder relationship will over time destroy your company. And so in that sense, it's never too late. If you know that you have the wrong co-founding relationship, if you know that you have the wrong co-founder, even if it feels really painful to address that, you have to address it. Like you have to address it now, because the longer you leave it, the more there is to lose, the messier it will be to sort out, the more painful it will be for each of you, and the more damaging it will be for the company's prospects. So we really, really think you have to constantly be asking yourself, is this the right co-founder relationship? I mean, at some point you're all in. Like, I don't constantly ask myself, is Alice the right co-founder for me? But I mean, like, you should think of yourself as having a period in which you have to get to conviction. And if at the end of it, like, that's probably going to be 2 or 3 months. If at the end of it you haven't reached conviction, it's probably wrong. The opposite mistake is never really testing it, making it like playing the game on easy mode, like not having the tough conversations, not giving each other feedback. You have to be willing to give each other tough feedback. It's going to be tough along the way. And so you're right, EF, the way we approach this, because it's really hard to do in real life. Most of us are really not comfortable being like, let me give you some really hard feedback about like what you need to do differently. So EF does a few things to make this easier. One, which you sort of hinted at, is we celebrate breakups. So we see a break. If we start working together at EF And after 3 days, you're like, oh my goodness, I cannot work with Matt. He's just like super lazy. Maybe not lazy, because hopefully we don't have lazy people at EF. But like Matt and I just like, he's just really annoying. Like I don't want to work with them. We at EF, we would break up. We'd teach you how to have that difficult conversation. And then the bit that people at first find a bit weird, but is super powerful, is automatically that breakup will be broadcast on the cohort Slack channel. So everyone will know that we've broken up. And there's two reasons for that. One, it's really important to normalize the idea of iterating. Like, it's not marriage. You're not trying to get it right on day one. Like, it's basically an iterative process of finding the right person. So normalizing that breakups are good and it's how you get closer towards finding the right person is important. The second thing is it advertises to the rest of the community that, hey, Matt and Zara are now free and looking for other co-founders. And that's really valuable as well. And so, one of the things that I find remarkable at EF, that even I'm a bit surprised how well it works, is that 80% of people that join us do find a co-founder in our community, which is pretty extraordinary. The
And to
other
clarify, they don't know each other from
Yeah, yeah,
beforehand. They
they've
just
met
met
at
through the
EF,
program.
and so that's
Yeah.
within 3 months of meeting. And the cool thing, the thing that I really like, is that although people break up during that 3-month process all the time, if you look at the failure of our co-founding teams post-investment, it's actually lower than in the market as a whole. And I think it's partly because we put people through this baptism of fire where actually you're encouraged to have the hard conversation. Whereas I suspect when people organically find a co-founder, they often dodge the really difficult questions.
And how can we encourage that destigmatization of company or co-founder breakups outside of EF as well? Because like,
Yeah,
people
yeah.
at earlier stages or just doing different things, like how can we make sure that we have that same model? So I think it's great.
I think it's something that still isn't talked about enough. I think the main thing we can do is normalize some important facts about co-founder relationships. Like in a successful company, you will almost certainly become or remain very good friends with your co-founder. But you're in looking for a co-founder, you're not looking for a friend. Now, actually, I am very good friends with Alice, but as co-founders, that's not why we work together. We're co-founders because we make each other more productive. And so I think one of the things, if you're starting the company with anyone, one of the most important things you can ask yourself is, does this person make me more productive? Does this person make me a better version of me? And if the answer is no, then it doesn't matter how much you would go for a coffee with them or go for a drink with them or hang out with them. That's not what you're looking for. You're looking for someone who's going to build a huge business with you. So again, doesn't mean that you should not like them. Obviously, that's not going to work either. But I think one of the biggest mistakes people make is trying to find a friend and not a co-founder. So I think just normalizing having these quite functional conversations about, is this working? Are we making each other more productive? Are we aligned on vision and mission and values? I think basically like many things in life, particularly things that have the potential to be awkward, 90% of the battle is just talking and talking more
Mhm.
openly and honestly.
Yeah, and I'm definitely optimistic about that trend, particularly with people, building in public, talking more about
Yeah,
their
exactly.
journeys and being more realistic about the struggles they face. It's not all like, hey, we just raised, Series A and it was fantastic, smooth sailing till then. um,
100%, 100%.
we have a final question. Someone has asked, what are the requirements for applying to EF and how competitive is it to get into EF? So maybe you'll have some applications from this.
Well, maybe I'll take the second bit first. I mean, it is very competitive to get in. I have to be honest. It's a super selective program, mainly, well, for a couple of reasons. One, we just get a lot of applications, and two, we don't believe everyone should be a founder. We're all about founders. We're all about increasing the supply of great founders in the world. But being a founder is really hard, and it's not for everyone. And we don't even recommend it to everyone. I mean, it's stressful. It's often painful. It's hard work. It's not always fun. Yes, you can get fabulously rich doing it, but most people don't. See, like there's lots of downsides to being a founder that we wouldn't want to exaggerate. The upsides. Although I do think that for the right person, it's the most rewarding way to spend your life. I mean, the learning is uncapped, the impact is uncapped, potentially the wealth generation is uncapped if you succeed. I mean, it is an extraordinary thing. So what are we looking for? Well, broadly, four things. And the thing I would emphasize is we have a really open mind about how you demonstrate these four things. You don't need a PhD or even a degree to apply to EF. We funded high school dropouts. So we don't mind how you demonstrate these four things, but these four things are really important. So what are they? One, we want really smart people. Probably goes without saying, but Startups are just one problem after another. And so your job as a founder is to solve those problems. And so you need people who are great problem solvers. Now, sometimes that means they're super academic and they've done like really well at school, really well at uni, etc. Sometimes it's completely different. The way they demonstrate that they're smart is like much more practical and nothing at all to do with academics. We don't mind, but we want to show evidence of like endlessly creative problem solving. The second is skill. We want someone who's bringing something to the table. I talked about edge when I was doing the talk. One way of thinking about edge is it's just something you're really, really good at. Now, nearly every founder needs to have something that the other co-founder will be like, well, yeah, that's what they do. That's what they're really good at. Maybe it's pitching. Maybe it's negotiating. Maybe it's designing. Maybe it's building. Like any of these things, we're really open-minded about what it is, but we want you to have a skill or a thing that you think is important for a founder to be able to do that you're super, super good at. And we just want to see evidence of that. Again, we don't mind what kind of evidence. Could be academic, could be sporting, could be work experience, could be side projects, but we just want to see that there's some skill you're bringing to the table. Third, we're looking, and again, like you sort of probably got the idea from my presentation, we're looking for ambition. We want people who have a real drive to achieve and want to do something big. Partly that's an economic reason, like for our financial model to work, we need people to build really big companies, billion-dollar companies. Partly it's just an impact thing. You know, we get out of bed in the morning because we love helping people achieve their ambitions and we want them to be big ambitions. So again, what that means will vary hugely from person to person. People at EF are super diverse, but we just want to see evidence that you really have that drive to achieve, that drive to do something really big. And fourth, we want to see people who are willing to challenge the status quo. So, you know, today entrepreneurship is quite popular. It's much more popular than when we started EF 10 years ago. So the slight danger is you get a lot of people who want entrepreneurship to be like a career path or a corporate ladder, and it's just tick the box and become an entrepreneur. And I'm afraid no one can help you do that. EF can't help you do that, neither can anyone else. So we want to see some evidence that you've kind of taken a slightly less structured path. I don't mean that you haven't done all the normal things, but you've got some part of you that's allowed you to try stuff that other people might not have tried. You haven't just kept to the like tick the box, pod down the road path. And so again, maybe that's building a side project. Maybe it's starting something, whether it might not be a company, it could be a sports team or a club at university or, you know, community or anything, but just something where you've not just done what was expected of you. That's super important. And again, all those things we're incredibly open-minded about what it looks like.
So consultants aren't disqualified.
Consultants are not disqualified, but nor is it all consultants. I mean, like honestly, at EF, we have everything from we literally have a person who's so academic that she did her PhD with Stephen Hawking, right through to like someone who joined us at 18 and never had finished school. Like,
Wow, okay.
so like we're just looking for outliers, people who have an unusually high likelihood of doing something amazing.